Great to see you all joining from around the world. I have to admit, this is very different than teaching in the classroom because it's always a face-to-face interaction. And I think, the COVID-19 situation has transported all of us into an online virtual environment nowadays. And I definitely think it definitely boosts our online teaching skills. I have to admit, I'm not used to teaching online, but I'm actually very much loving this. And because I get to reach an audience that I normally don't get to reach on a daily basis. So first of all, welcome. Second of all, I just want to kind of briefly introduce myself before I get into the topic. So my name is Dr. Ali Fenwick, and I am a professor of organizational behavior at Hult International Business School, and I teach mainly on the Dubai and the London campuses. Now, in today's webinar, I'm going to talk to you about the psychology of panic buying. And this is a phenomena that we've just recently started to see around the world. You've probably seen it yourself in supermarkets. You've also probably seen it in online and on social media. What's very interesting is that when we see this behavior, we're so easily to attribute this to selfishness. Right? But nothing is less true. There are so many other factors at play that contribute to panic buying. Now, in today's webinar, I really want to focus on the behavioral perspective of things, because that's my specialization, so that you have a better understanding of the psychological drivers underlying panic buying behaviors. I'm going to do a couple of things. I love to see where everyone was coming from. I have this really, really cool function. I'm going to press it over here. And I know that not everyone is really good at speaking English, or maybe not everyone can hear me properly because of the internet function. If you check down below, all my words are being transcribed on the fly. Isn't that a cool function? I love it. So if you can't hear me clearly because of the internet connection, or I'm going too fast for you, then definitely take a look at the text below so that you can also read while listening to me as I speak. Now, in addition to this is such a relevant topic. I've been speaking about this a lot in the last week, not just in the classroom, let's say on the online classroom, but also on TV and in the media, because it's a phenomenon that we're seeing around the world. So if you'd like to, even after this class, and this is the thing that I really, really love about this webinar, is that the learning and the experience continues even after this webinar, because this topic is so relevant. So please do connect with me on LinkedIn, where I'll have more of the professional discussions, where I'll provide more of an intellectual discussion on the phenomena that we're now currently experiencing around panic buying or around COVID-19. So social distancing and all the other behavioral aspects that we're now currently seeing related to this pandemic situation. But also you can connect with me on Instagram, and that's where I'll have a more informal discussion. I also share with you much more of the video content, the media that's been out there, where I've also spoken, so that you can get a much more deeper perspective or broader perspective to what we're going to be discussing today. So again, well, after this class, it doesn't end there. We will keep on having that dialogue. And if you'd like to have a one-to-one with me, then definitely the social media outlets are a great way to do that. I also know a lot of people like to make stories, and definitely that's the tagline that you can use for stories on Instagram. Okay, guys. So I guess let's get started. From my side, yes, I also just have some housekeeping, short housekeeping stuff that I want to mention. Also for those who are not used to online classes or to Zoom specifically. Now, what I really like in my classroom is engagement. I love engagement. And I was thinking, how am I going to get this engagement going online? But apparently we can actually do that. And I try to incorporate some of that in here. So what I like to do during, not just only at the end of this masterclass when we actually have a Q&A, but also during the masterclass, I'll be asking you questions so that we have time to engage and interact with each other. We can learn so much from each other, right? Especially with such a global viewership today and participation. I think we can get such a global perspective during this class as well. So I'll have moments that we can allow you to participate in interacting and providing your perspective. So how to do this, if you have any specific questions, please do use the Q&A button, as you can see on your screen. There you can pose your questions, and once your questions do come up, when I can address them, then I will read out your name and the question, and I will try to address that question on the spot. I also have some more stuff coming later, which we can also use the chat function for. Okay, so please put your questions in Q&A, and as I already mentioned, I'll call out your name, and I'll also call out the questions so that I can answer them. Very good. Just a little bit more of an introduction from my side. So at Hult, I teach everything around behavior. I specialize in the, let's say, the behavioral foundations of organizational management, and explain how behavior affects people outcomes, performance outcomes, and how we can devise strategies around that to be much more effective as organizations, as companies, or even as a society, in that matter of fact. Other topics that I teach about are behavioral economics, leading global organizations, and also leading for innovation. Another thing that I do at Hult is I run the program called the HBC, or the Hult Business Challenge. Now, the Hult Business Challenge is basically a capstone project. Instead of, where in traditional universities you would write a thesis, at Hult, what we do is we replace the thesis with a 2 to 3 month actual project that you would work for a real live customer or client, let's say, as a consultant, or work on an innovation question or a big topic that you hope to solve using enabling technologies. So that's a little bit about what I do at Hult as a professor. As a profession, I am an industrial organizational psychologist. I actually specialize in cognitive psychology and in talent management. I really am all about performance and about people. I work for different organizations around the world. So institutions, education institutions, sports teams, and also for the military, and how to apply behavioral principles and psychological concepts in the assessment of new cadets or new hires, and also to help people further enhance their physical and also their mental capacity. So that's something that I specialize in. I also like to share some personal stuff about myself, not just only about my professional persona, but also about my personal side. I'm half English and I'm half Spanish, but I was born in the Netherlands. Can it get any complex? Yes, it can. My name is Ali Fenwick. I have a very Arabic name. I'm not Arabic. No, I haven't converted either. But it's a beautiful story. My full name is actually Musa Ali Fenwick. It's a love story from my parents' side, and I hopefully we'll have some more time on social media to discuss more about that. If I would talk about that here today, we'd spend the next couple of hours. You'd miss out on the panic buying stuff. So I'll keep that for another time. I love sushi, by the way. Oh my God, I'm addicted to this. Raise your hands up if you like sushi as well. You can raise your hands up. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. There's a lot of people here that love sushi. Fantastic. I think I've made some new friends. Just to tell you how addicted I am to this stuff is, I used to live in Japan, and I remember on a Sunday night, or let's say 4 a.m. in the morning, someone actually woke me up by a phone call. I was like, who's calling me? I was like, yes. Yeah, do you want to come out and have sushi with us? I'm like, what? Sushi, yes. I said, okay. So I had literally woke up at 4 a.m. in the morning to have sushi with someone. I mean, in Japan, sushi is like having kebab, right? Basically, it's open 24 hours, many stores. That's how addicted I am to sushi. So seeing how many people here actually love sushi as well, I think I'll have some opportunities to go and have dinner with someone, but please don't call me at 4 a.m. in the morning, because I might just be that crazy to actually have sushi with you. Last thing I'd like to share with you is that I'm fairly fluent in Japanese. My bachelor's was in Japanese translation and interpretation, and I also worked for a Japanese company for many years before venturing into human behavior and doing my PhD in that field. So that's a little bit about me, and I always think it's really cool to share something personal about your stuff as well, about yourself. So what are we going to talk about in this masterclass today? Well, as I mentioned, I want to talk to you about the psychology of panic buying. But before we get into this whole concept of the psychology or psychological drivers of panic buying, I first want to kind of look at what is panic buying, what is it, and how does this phenomenon happen? Once we've done that, I also want to look at what are specifically the psychological reasons behind it. So let me just throw a disclaimer out there. There are many other reasons why people panic buy or bulk buy, psychological plus non-psychological reasons. But what I'm going to do in today's masterclass is I'm going to specifically focus on the psychological reasons behind this panic buying. And then I'm going to open up for Q&A so that we can have much more of a discussion around this. The great thing is that we're such an international crowd today, so we can have a really, really broad discussion around this. And why have this discussion? I think it's really important. The role of behavioral science, specifically in this panic situation and pandemic that we're currently experiencing at the moment, is very important, because having an understanding or a deep understanding of the different factors that are driving behavior. You can probably hear a chicken in the background. It sounds like there is actually a farm not too far away from where I am actually now. But anyway, so if you hear that, apologies for that. See there, it's still going. Oh my goodness, I didn't think about that. Anyway, so what was I going to say? I lost my track. So the reason why behavioral science is so very important here, because it helps us to really understand the, let's say, the behaviors, the drivers behind this behavior. And once we have a full picture of why certain phenomena happen, then we can come up with better policy design or better strategies on how to address these specific behaviors, or address a specific phenomena related to that behavior, to how to solve it. So this is why behavioral science plays such an important role in helping us to understand what we're seeing happening around the world. Okay, so moving on. As I said, I like to have a lot of interaction here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch the poll. I have a poll and a question that I want to ask you guys. And I want to see how you actually are currently experiencing panic buying. So here goes. I'm going to launch the poll. And while I launch the poll, I'm going to try and close my door because I can hear that cock-a-doodle-doo in the background too much. So the question to you guys is, have you in the last weeks gone on a panic buying frenzy? So have you in the past weeks gone on a panic buying frenzy? And that can be for products, that can be for non-essential goods, but that also can be for maybe medication, for example. Right? So have you gone on a panic buying frenzy? I see that we have about 120 participants. Let me go here, check over here. 1 second. Can you all hear that cock-a-doodle-doo in the background? The joys of working from home. My goodness. Okay. Okay, let's see how many. I can still see people. I can still see people participating. And yes. So far, I'm going to share the poll with you in a second. We have about 69%, so almost 70% that have said no, and about 31% that has said yes. So there's still some votes coming in, I see. So just give this a second. Perfect. Perfect. So we're getting close to 103. So, okay, I think I can share the results with you now. So we have about a 30-70 split. So 30% of you have said, yes, I have gone on a panic buying frenzy in the last couple of weeks. And 70% has said, no, I have not. Okay, that's good. There's no wrong or no right answer here. It's just for me to get an understanding how many people have gone on this frenzy. Okay, so let me see if I can share the results. 1 second. So let me end the poll and let's share the results. You should be able to see the results right now on your screen. Okay, there, 30-70 split about. Perfect, stop sharing and I'm going to close the poll right now. Okay, so before we get started and dive into this whole concept or perspective of panic buying, let's first take a step back and look at this more holistically. What is the situation that we're currently in? This COVID-19 coronavirus has led to a global pandemic, a situation that I don't think lots of us have ever experienced before. And because of this creates, of course, a lot of uncertainty, not only for us citizens, let's say, but also for governments and worldwide institutions around the world. The WHO, for example, the World Health Organization, And also many governments still don't know how to effectively address this issue. It's such a new experience. So how do we go about it? How do we cure this? Why do some people get more affected than others, or more affected by the virus than others? Still, there's a lot of questions around this. And this also then leads to inconsistencies and how, I guess, public agencies are communicating about this virus. So more as we move on, we get a better understanding. But this inconsistency is definitely one factor that is leading to a lot of uncertainty around us. And when we experience uncertainty, or we, let's say, perceive a situation as threatening, then that can often lead us to go into a panic situation, which I'm going to talk more about in a second. Now, this uncertainty also has led to a lot of new instructions, or let's say behavioral phenomena that we're now seeing not just in 1 or 2 countries, but literally around the world. Now, some of the behavioral phenomena that is related to COVID-19, I'm going to give here some examples. For example, we're now seeing that governments are telling us to prevent the further spread of this virus, to keep distance from each other, social distancing. I'll come back to that in a second. And so the physical distance that we actually have to keep from each other in terms of a guideline is around 6 to 6.5 feet. Or in meters, if you're used to meters, it's about 1.5 to 2 meters. But if you look around you, and I guess we all are affected by this, how difficult is it to maintain that 6.5 feet distance from one another, especially when you're in a retail store or a supermarket, or you are outside? It does seem, I mean, we logically know that we need to do it, but again, why are we not always adhering to that distance? And sometimes the spaces that we operate in makes it very hard for us to do so. A great example of a phenomena that we're now currently seeing, which I've also been speaking about in the news, is that social distancing is not really working. Now, I personally have an issue with the term social distancing. I'll come back to that a little bit later, but I think we should be using the term physical distancing, because we need to take distance from each other in proximity. But social distancing, in that sense, how can we not be social when it's so fundamental to us being human? And so the phenomena that we're now seeing, for example, bottom left corner, you there see, for example, people who are on spring break, young people getting together, disregarding the advice that's being given to them, and just partying and pretending that it's not happening. Reasons for this could not only be because, younger people seem to be less affected by the COVID-19 virus, but also just because maybe we just want to be together in these times of uncertainty. So there's multiple reasons what are driving us, but very interesting for us to look at this and try to interpret from a behavioral lens what's really happening here. Now, top right corner, as you can see there, a lot of us are being told to self-isolate. Some countries actually have put curfews on their citizens, telling them not to go out in specific times, or not to go out at all, or only for, let's say, essential activities such as going to the pharmacy, or actually going out to buy shopping and groceries. And so for a lot of us, being now told to stay home is a very difficult thing. It's great when you think about it now, like, oh, wait, I'm working from home. Isn't that a great thing? A lot of us try to have work from home because to pursue a much more, better work-life balance. And we perceive that as a good thing. But what's happening now is that, when restrictions are being imposed on us and we're now told to actually stay at home, that can also have adverse effects to us over time and be very challenging. I'm currently working on something called the psychology of panic working, and kind of relates to that situation of being told to have to work at home and how that actually affects us. And finally, down below, you will see, and basically what we're doing today, right? I mean, all our work has transported to online. We're using the online digital space to communicate and socialize with each other. Also an extremely interesting phenomena, not just from a work perspective, but also from a social perspective. People are now, as a way to have their social daily intake, or the daily intake of social, let's say, encounters, we're now moving also our friends and family connections to the online environment, especially if we're not close to each other. So now we're seeing new phenomena happening around the world, such as virtual pizza time and digital cocktails, or online raves that I saw happening in Germany. How fun is that? I don't know, but I think this is kind of all of these new experiences are definitely making it very interesting to observe from a behavioral perspective of what's driving these behaviors, but at the same time, how can we address these behaviors as well? Very good. So now, enough said from my side. Again, I love to have this interaction with you. So I want to ask you now, and maybe you can make use of the chat function. Okay, so maybe you can make use of the chat function, and I want you to provide what your definition is of panic buying. So let me know, what is your definition of panic buying? So what is panic buying for you? Everyone might have a different definition here. Remember, there is no wrong and there is no right answer to this. So please use the chat function, not the Q&A function, but please use the chat function and provide your definition of panic buying. And I'll read out a couple as well. Okay, let's see over here. Okay, so we have, 1 second. A lot are coming in. Jamal Tarif, buying so much toilet paper for no reason. Okay, that's a part of, there's actually reasons for that. We'll come to that in a second, Jamal. Aishwarya, buying more than what you actually need to have. Yes, yes, indeed. I'll talk a little bit more about that. So what's the difference between bulk buying and panic buying? And how do we differentiate between the rational and irrational state? Buying of non-essential things, okay? That also is a definition of panic buying, very interesting. We'll come to that later. Hoarding essential commodities. I like the difference that you use in terminology here, buying versus hoarding. Okay, Melissa Curler, storage for difficult times, okay? Storage for difficult times. Hernando, people just blindly go with the flow, and I'll come to that a little bit later in my presentation as well. Hamida Kambari, people buy more than what they need as a result of fear of not being able to access those goods in the future, right? So kind of that anticipation of what might happen. Hoarding due to fear. Unreasonable purchases we see here. Buying things, Beatrice, buying things that is more than necessary. You buy your needs and wants while you can, driven by the fear that you will run out, resources are scarce, there's limited time, so you want to make the most out of it. I like that one as well. Let's see if we can go down a little bit more. Klaus Hoffman, panic buying, uncontrolled purchases of items due to lack of safety feeling. Great one, I like that one as well. Let's see if we have any other ones here. Amit Kiran, purchases in anticipation of scarcity when there's none, which then results in scarcity. Yes, very good. We'll talk about that as well. Let me see if I have any other definitions here. It's Alexia Dupras, in the fear of not having enough at home, having toilet paper and food is reassuring for some people. Absolutely. And I'll try and address that also in the next coming slides. Stockpiling, and Fiona Zhao, stockpiling is the fear of remaining without necessary stuff. Losing, and she also says, losing rationality. Yes. Oh my goodness. Let's talk about that. Very good. I'm really, really liking this. And what I love about posing this to you guys and asking you to provide your own definition is that from these various kind of forms of definitions, or various definitions that can be given to what is panic buying, we can derive some commonalities among them to have this kind of global understanding of what panic buying is. But more importantly, what I also like in the definitions that you're still giving right now, they're coming in as we speak, is the fact that alternative definitions can also trigger us to think a little bit more deeply about what is panic buying. Wait a minute, I'm seeing this definition over here. I never thought about that. That helps me to also further understand, but also to further interpret what is panic buying and maybe how can we further address this, right? So I'm loving this because this collective knowledge, and this is the great thing about doing everything online. Fantastic, guys. I'm going to leave it for there, and then I'm going to move on to the next slides, but thank you for providing your perspective. Again, I'm loving this global interaction here so that we can see so many different perspectives from each other. Great. Okay, so let me share with you a common definition, also very similar definition on Wikipedia, by the way, slightly altered, of what panic buying is, right? So panic buying happens when consumers buy unusual large amounts of products in anticipation of or after a disaster or perceived disaster, or in anticipation of a large price increase or shortage. Now, this is a very common definition of panic buying. So let's dissect this definition for a second. There's two specific elements that I find very interesting here, and I'm going to share these with you. In anticipation of and perceived disaster. Now, these two specific elements in this definition kind of hint towards a psychological effect, right? We're anticipating, I saw some of the answers that were given down below. We're anticipating that something might happen. It's not there right now, but therefore we will react to that anticipation. And then the other perspective is there is a perceived threat or a perceived disaster. Now, remember when we say perceived, not everyone has the same perception, right? So perception is reality. Therefore, there are multiple realities to this. So why do some people perceive it as a disaster and others don't? So therefore, there is a psychological effect in affecting people why they panic buy. However, and here's where I'm going to be very critical, is that my issue with this definition is that it doesn't really reflect or fully explain the psychological drivers behind this behavior. And especially, as I mentioned in the beginning, when we're trying to come up with solutions on how to address the panic buying situation or similar situations like this, we need to have a better understanding of the psychological drivers or the behavioral perspective in that sense to better understand what's really happening there before we can actually come up with solutions to help to address this. Now, just a week ago, just about 10 days ago, I was in South Africa, and I was there for setting up a new social innovation startup. And I heard that Europe was going to go into lockdown, so I decided that I had to come back to Europe. And I had one day left, and I see everyone moving more online nowadays. And so I decided, well, why don't I make a video and kind of give people a better perspective of at least some of the core psychological drivers behind this strange phenomena that we see happening today. Okay, strange, it isn't that strange. Why? Because we've seen this behavior happen before in the past. When there's hurricanes or floods or other disaster situations, people tend to go out to stockpile and panic buy. So I made this video, and when I put this video online and also on LinkedIn, and literally within, let's say within hours, within days, this went viral. And it also hit the media. And I was also invited to speak on Al Jazeera News 2 times about the psychology behind some of the phenomena that we're actually seeing happening, including that of panic buying. It made the news in the US. It also and reached a lot of the big media outlets around the world, from, let's say, Europe to Singapore and Asia, Hong Kong, and also into the Spanish, in the UK, Europe, and back into Spain. So it went fairly global and fairly quick. And this kind of makes me realize that there is such a innate need to have a better psychological understanding, especially in these times of uncertainty, so that we can feel more assured about how could we potentially address this. And this is what I love to say, is that the behavioral science movement today is really playing a huge role in helping governments, organizations, and people around the world to better understand what's really happening today. Because in the end, people behavior is driven by not only psychological aspects, but also about emotional, environmental, contextual cues. And having a thorough understanding about this can also help us to better interpret, understand, predict, and influence behavior. And that's why I think there's a lot of need and demand currently from different public and private sectors around the world for psychologists to jump in and behavioral scientists to jump in to provide that perspective to help better understand what's happening. And hence, of course, this video. Okay, so let's get into the psychology of panic buying. Again, as I mentioned, there's many other reasons why people are panic buying, but I want to kind of focus on the 4 main psychological reasons why people are actually going out and buying more than they actually need to have. Now, the first reason that I want to mention is survival mode. Now, again, looking at the bigger picture, we are currently living in very unusual times, but also very uncertain times. As I mentioned, there's a lot of uncertainty going on around us, and we perceive this situation as threatening. It's kind of strange. There's an invisible threat in front of us, an invisible enemy, as it's often called, but how do we deal with this? And so the moment that we are put into a perceived threat situation, or a threatening situation, our survival mode kicks in. And when that happens, it literally, rational thinking goes out of the window, and a lot of our behaviors is also now driven through our emotions. And when this happens, and bringing this back to buying, we go out and we panic buy because we're not buying to rationalize, we're buying to survive, right? There's also multiple reasons why other people might go out and buy stuff, but really the survival mode is a big driver for us to go out and panic buy. And also buy stuff that we probably don't need to have. Look, a rational way of buying stuff is, well, I need to stock up. I'll buy about 10, pieces that I need to have so that I can, get through these 2 weeks of isolation. But buying 500 is completely irrational. It doesn't make sense. And I'll come back to that a little bit later in today's presentation. The second effect that I want to focus on is called the scarcity effect. Now, once products run out and become scarce, and especially when we're in a panic situation or an uncertain situation, those products become more valuable to us. We perceive them as being more valuable, and therefore we want them more than we would normally want them to have. Also, as I mentioned, in disaster situations such as hurricanes and flooding, we can anticipate, I was already mentioned, that there might be disruptions to the supply chain or less food available. So we want to make sure that we have enough to be able to survive. So the scarcity effect is an additional effect that is also driving panic buying. Now, as I mentioned, when we perceive a product as being much more valuable, we're also more willing to pay more money for a product. So this is the reason why we've seen, for example, surgical masks, prices for them going up tremendously, which I just completely think it's immoral, especially because, our frontline soldiers, let's say, the surgeons and the doctors and everyone working in healthcare, they're the ones that are helping us to prevent this virus from spreading, and they're the ones that need it the most. So it's very shameful to see that, actually people are going out and trying to make a buck on something that we need to have to survive. But again, human nature, let's say. But the scarcity effect has an impact on that, especially on panic buying. Now, what the scarcity effect also does, because it's such a strong driver of behavior, is that it also makes us to do things that we don't want. Like, for example, we might not want to buy. And here's a great example. I'm trying to have a kind of a comedy moment here. So again, on the right-hand side, people are really waiting for toilet paper, and hopefully during the Q&A, we can have a much more deeper discussion around why toilet paper, because it's not just only of scarcity. We also have certain associations with this. But look on the left, really going out and buying a coffin. I mean, why do we need to have a coffin? It's crazy. But then again, scarcity also helps, in survival mode, it makes us do very irrational things sometimes. Okay, reason number 3 has to do with herd behavior. Now, as I mentioned before, we are social animals. We are social creatures in that sense. We want to belong to a group, and connecting, this human connection is so fundamental to who we are as humans. Now, especially when I mentioned when we're dealing with an uncertain situation, social psychology 101 kicks in. When we don't know what to do, we follow other people, especially other people like you and me. Right? So I'll repeat that again. Especially in certain situations when we don't know what to do, we tend to follow other people, especially other people like us. And so when other people go out and they go out and buy stuff, even though we might not want to do that initially, that herd behavior can be so powerful that influences, overrides our own personal goals and makes us also to follow along with the group. Now, remember one thing, also from a social psychological perspective, is that groups and social entities that we belong to, our friends, our families, and yes, also our social networks, contacts on social media, people that we like and that we respect or we look up to, have also a huge impact on how we behave. Actually, what social psychology shows us is that social groups, because we derive so much meaning and identity from the social groups that we interact with, that also that social group and the mannerisms and the behaviors and also the values, they also have a huge impact on our personal behaviors, even when we're not part of that social group. So that's also another reason why herd behavior is so powerful in influencing individual behavior. And finally, the last one that I want to share with you is about regaining control. What's happening around the world, curfews are being imposed. We're told to self-isolate. We're also told to keep distance from each other. All of these restrictions, let's say, and advice, well, I would call it more restrictions, is to prevent, of course, rationally thinking, to prevent the further spread of the virus. But what it's doing to us psychologically is it's giving us this kind of feeling of being powerless, or that we're losing control. So we naturally want to exert our sense of control over our surroundings because it helps us to feel safe. It helps us to feel secure. And so if we are being imposed restrictions, we want to have other ways for us to also impose our control so that we can feel better. So going out and buying stuff, panic buying or buying stuff that we don't need to have, is a way for us to say, look, it's empowering me. This buying is empowering me because I feel more in control now. So this is a very important aspect that is often forgotten, but we need to take into consideration why panic buying is happening. So as you can see, there are multiple factors at play that are driving this irrational, but also sometimes the rational states, why we're going out and panic buying and buying more than we need to have. Okay, I'm going to call in another interaction moment. I think I've given you some good information for now, and now I kind of want to throw it back out to you guys. I specifically focused on the psychological factors that drive panic behavior or panic buying behavior, but I want to ask you, what other reasons, also non-psychological, but also non-psychological reasons, do you believe leads to panic buying? Okay, so what other psychological and non-psychological reasons do you believe lead to panic buying? So let's use the chat so that we can share this knowledge with each other, and I'm going to call out a couple of them as you throw them in. Inflation, greed, yes, greed, absolutely. Seizing the opportunity to resell at higher margins, yes, I completely agree. And again, in such a global situation, such a global issue that affects all of us, I find this very immoral in general, but when it really, has to do with our safety, this is a very immoral thing to do. So yes, selfishness, as we mentioned, past experiences. Past experiences is a great point. We drive a lot of meaning from what we've experienced in the past, and that not only looks consciously, but also unconsciously drives a lot of our behaviors in the current state. So, and not to counteract this, but if we've had that experience in the past, we're more likely to do that again. But let's say if we can learn from this panic buying situation, we know how to address this in the future, that when a similar situation, God forbid that doesn't happen, but when a similar situation happens again, and we see as a government or as a country that we've dealt with this effectively, that probably that will lower the impact, lower the likelihood of panic buying happening again. Because remember one thing, governments have gone out and they have made this promise to people of this country, please don't worry, we have enough supply. But because we've never had this experience before, we don't know how to react. And so because of that, we now decide to go out and buy all that we can so that we are sure that we can at least, that we have enough stuff there. But now I think what's happening is that as this situation is progressing and we're seeing that promises in certain countries are definitely being met, this experience will definitely affect how we behave in the future. So I really like that point. What else do we have here? Social media, absolutely. I mean, it was funny. I did an interview just recently for a podcast, and I was talking about herd behavior. And so Kurt, one of the interviewers, he asked me, he said, "But where is the social behavior when you're isolated at home?" I said, "Exactly this. It's from your phone, social media. That's why it's called social media, because it has such a huge impact on our behaviors because of our social digital networks." So yes, what else do we have here? Because we cannot go out often in disasters, so this is the change to buy something for the future. Yes. Okay. Unavailability of daily items due to supply chain gap. Akhilesh Sharma, great point. So this is definitely one of the issues that people are forgetting, is that this is not just only psychological. The non-psychological major issue here has to do with supply chain management. The traditional supply chain at this stage or this moment, providing you the products through the supermarkets at the pricing that you're buying today, is all based on how it's being produced, delivered, and sold. And so this, traditional chain has not been optimized yet for such an unprecedented demand for these products. And also the shelves are basically also the bottleneck, because you can't get so many products onto the shelves as well. So supply chain management and stocking play a huge role in this. Again, this is not my field of expertise. I do know that this is definitely one of the reasons why. We have a great professor at Hult. His name is Professor Dr. Nick Wake, who's a professor of operations. And he will definitely speak to you more about this. I'm pretty sure that in the months to come in his classes, he's going to be using this COVID situation to further help people think about how to optimize and improve or even plan for for such, disruptions to the existing supply chain. Okay, so let me go down and see what other items you guys came up with before I move to the next slides. Because the next slides, I'm going to talk more about the strategies on how we can tackle this. I always keep the best for last. Let's say persuasion by social media. Yes, we've seen that already. Personal perspective is not a good idea to be on the state of panic buying. Economically, it does increase the supply because of high demands, but on values aspect, it hinders other people to also have substantial amount of food and other items. Vedant, Braya, I completely agree with you. Look, in sales and marketing, the scarcity effect is used to drive behavior. Look at booking.com, for example. They, when you go there and try to book a hotel room, you see there's only 3 rooms left. And, 97% of London are looking, have booked all the hotels, and 2 people or 4 people are looking at this room now. So it's very much that kind of creating that urgency for you to make a next step. And so, this whole, it's an unfortunate situation that this is happening right now. And the panic buying is not good, but I think as this is happening, we're learning from this, and learning how to deal with the scarcity and also with this situation, the scenario that's actually triggering panic buying, and then we can come up with better strategies. So I'm thinking we're doing a great job at learning and learning what works and what doesn't work, also from a psychological perspective, so that we can devise strategies to come up with better solutions. Let's see what we have over here. Family and friends urging you to do so. Very much that herd effect, right? That social influence. What else do we have here? Commanded by others, I see here, Keita. Yes, very much a social influence there as well. I also think maybe if we look at the cultural differences, there could also be aspects of there to play. And think about also the, let's say, institutional macro factors that are at play. For example, in Europe, almost many countries on the European continent, we see that there's a social, kind of bargaining or a social system in place that secures the safety of SMEs. If you lose a job, that you still receive an income. So of course, that is another factor that might prevent you or provoke you to panic buy. In countries where you don't have that, will you still have a job? So yes, the institutional context is also something that plays a huge role on affecting these kinds of behaviors. Though very proximal, they still do affect. Here, James Lamb, unbalanced economy. Some places have no production industry, like Hong Kong doesn't farm and rely on import. Yes, absolutely, absolutely. I like here Zhao Rikin being very positive. I'm going to end, of course, with a positive note at the end of this presentation. Also, kind of talk a little bit more about what can we learn from COVID-19 and how can we strategize and improve our lives moving forward. So I'll try and talk about that as we come to a closing. Political reasons, absolutely. Losing trust in their governments. And again, this is said by, who is this? Sorry, it's going a little bit fast. Nutida, absolutely. I mean, also because of the inconsistencies in communication, but maybe other factors, we might not be so trustworthy towards governments. And I'm trying to say that this is where other people come into play. This is where other specialists and experts come into play to help us be better informed, to fill that gap of uncertainty. Hopefully psychologists can play that reason there, a role as well to help fill that gap. Okay, guys, really, really good stuff here. I have one more, Ashley Fernandez, and then I'll move on to the strategies that we can discuss on how to address this panic buying situation. Based on your experiences living in Japan, do you see the average Japanese citizen more responsible when it comes to equal distribution and limited resources? Great question. This is a question that I'm going to answer. If you could pose that into the Q&A, Ashley, I'll address that question there. Here, I just wanted to look what other reasons that you could come up with, but I like the question that you have there. I'll try and address it. Very good. Moving forward, guys, just to make sure that we stay within the time. I want to look at what are some of the strategies. So I've been speaking to companies. I am currently speaking to companies and other public institutions as well, to talk about what are some of the strategies or the behavioral approaches that we could take to address some of the issues. And as I mentioned, and as you just discussed in the previous slide, this is not just only a behavioral problem. There is also issues with supply chain management And I think redesigning the supply chain is one of the big solutions. So how can we come up with better strategies on redesigning the supply chain to ensure that we can deal with these very unprecedented situations and still be able to supply food to people to get to them when they need to have it. So let's look at China, some examples there. In China, I know home delivery is very big. Unfortunately, not in every country around the world. In the Netherlands, it's not big at all. So that hasn't really been a solution here. But redesigning your supply chain, moving, for example, your B2B business more to consumers so that consumers have more food supply, but also looking for different outlets. Hotels could be potential outlets. Restaurants could be potential outlets, so that you can still maintain the existing ecosystem and still provide food, but also at the same time, doing something good to the other parties that are actually losing business because of self-isolation. So these are some things that I think that we'll learn from this. Optimizing, redesigning the supply chain definitely is going to be a solution there. Again, I think Dr. Nitwick, working at Hult, Professor, he is someone who can definitely tell you more about this. The other aspect that I want to touch upon is building trust with the consumer. I think this is so important. I think one of the roles that supermarkets have to play and other retail businesses is that they have to continuously communicate to consumers that there is no disruption to supply, if there's really no disruption to the supply, and that you need to make sure that the bottlenecks are addressed, and that you can show that you are continuously providing food supply to people. And as people build trust with you and they see that you're keeping and meeting your promises, people will start to believe you much more. And therefore you will see that this will definitely lower panic buying. Because remember, uncertainty is psychological, but building trust is also psychological. So these two are very connected. We spoke about government promises and those being kept. I think that also leads to building trust. And the final aspect is coming up with different strategies in store to address this issue. So one of the really cool strategies I've seen so far is coming up with senior only hours. And remember, seniors are very vulnerable to this virus, apparently, according to the data. So we need to protect them. And also, people going out and not social distancing, just thinking about themselves and not thinking that it's their problem. They do play a part in spreading the virus. So we need to be very cognizant about how to deal with those people, or how to facilitate those people that are most vulnerable. And seniors are definitely the target group. So supermarkets implementing a senior only hour in the morning time or in the afternoon or evening time is a great way to secure that our most vulnerable people are protected. I came up with a strategy that where you could do this online as well. So maybe as a retail store or as a supermarket, you could devise, prioritization to buying or deliveries based on, let's say, data that you've stored, big data or data that you've stored on loyalty cards, and on that basis, coming up with new interventions to help people to get food faster. Again, you have to be transparent about this, and it has to be moral. But as long as you keep that into consideration, those are great strategies that you can also apply online. Now, that being said, I want to leave you with some food for thought for yourselves, because again, remember, part of this webinar is to empower you guys. I really want to empower you. So I want to leave you with a short metaphor. Let's say, if there are 100 soldiers who need to fight the enemy, and one soldier hoards all the weapons for him or herself, then 99 people will be left without protection. There's no way that you can stop the enemy with one person protected. In our situation, COVID-19 is the enemy. And if everyone has enough food, sanitizers, masks, and yes, toilet paper, then everyone can do something about this virus. Buy enough to survive and help others to do the same. Okay, so buy enough to survive and help others do the same. Remember, the whole purpose of this webinar is to empower you guys so that you can help others make better decisions. If you are a decision maker yourself and you operate a business, or you have decision-making power over your operations, think about this. Think about how you can make use of these insights to help others, because I think that's all our responsibility today. I'm going to end up afterwards, after the Q&A, with how we can look at the good perspective of leveraging COVID-19 to improve how we start doing things moving forward. But before I get to that, I want you to write one thing down that you took away from today's masterclass. So use the chat function, or you can maybe even take a selfie and or make a story on Instagram and post it as you like. But I want you to write down one takeaway from today's masterclass? I always like to do this because I only know that within 45 minutes, you can only remember one or two things. So tell me what your one major takeaway was, and let's share that together in the chat so that everyone around the world can learn from each other. This is the beautiful thing about online learning nowadays, right? We learn so much from each other. Okay, don't panic buy. That's a key takeaway. Lena, thank you. Let's see over here. Let's see, the factors that contribute to panic buying, Umbrella by Valerie. Akalish, educating people on making people more aware about the merits and demerits of panic buying. Absolutely. Okay, let's see over here. What do we have over here? Panic buying is taking the weapon. Wait, it's going so fast. 1 second, where was that one? I thought that was a pretty good one. 1 second. No need to panic, spread the vibe. Ines, thank you for that one. I really like the one. OnePlus, I actually missed out. Oh, sorry about that. There's another session at 5 o'clock again, so I hope you can come in. Yannick, listen to Ali. Thank you so much. Let's continue that dialogue online. Here, Paul Jordan says, be transparent, especially in uncertain times. Absolutely. The more information we have, the better informed we are, and the less that we can allow our rationality to drive our behaviors, and the more rational we can become. Fiona, panic buying is taking weapons away from our allies. Absolutely. Let's not do that. We need to be the group to protect ourselves. Thomas R, stay rational, conscious about your own behavior. Absolutely. Meron Tesfa Johannes, crisis triggers survival mode, which makes people stop thinking rationally and more susceptible to emotional responses. Absolutely. Great ones. New Wing Liu, reasons for panic buy. Absolutely. Bertina, how important is it for us to understand why people panic buy and address accordingly? Very good, guys. I'm really loving this. By the way, we'll be sharing all of this with you after this webinar, so make sure to have it. I just want to quickly now move on to the Q&A, and I want to open up to you guys. So maybe you can use the Q&A function and pose your questions. I'll call out your name, call out the question, and then I'll address your personal questions to go deeper on this topic. Okay, so let's see what we have here. Paul Master, will there be a recording available afterwards? I may have to leave. Yes, there will be, absolutely. So there you go, answered. Hamida Kambari, past incidents have effect on PB, panic buying. For example, in my country, there was a very sad era of civil war when food was really scarce. Markets gone crazy when borders were closed and port cities were put on quarantine. Absolutely, I completely agree with you. And as I mentioned earlier in this presentation, past experiences really affect how we behave today. So let's learn from this global pandemic and let's see how we react and respond. And really, this webinar, education, doing a master's program or any other kind of education that can help us to learn from this specific situation can help us to be much more prepared for how to deal with this in the future again. So again, yes, we do panic buy because of it, but yes, also, we can also learn today to help us be better informed for the future. So absolutely, Hamida, very good. What else do we have here? Fawad Khan. Whenever I think of this idea of panic buying, I can't help but think of the behavioral finance and how this idea of panic buying and selling in relation to stocks has always been present. Panic buying and selling of stocks is more or less what keeps stocks so volatile because it's always based on people's behavior more than trends or anything else. Would you agree? I'll have to say, yes, I agree. I mean, pessimism in the market, behavioral finance is a great field of research which puts together psychology and finance, and pessimism, optimism are definitely factors that drive the market further, right? So if we anticipate a bad scenario or a good scenario, that also definitely affects the stock market. So I completely agree with you on that one. Tomiko Shimizu, here we go. Do you think there's a common psychological reason between consumers and shareholders? I'm not sure what you quite mean there, Tomoko. Maybe you could further elaborate that and I'll try to address that question afterwards. Ashley Fernandez, based on your experience living in Japan, okay, this is the great one. Do you see the average Japanese citizen more responsible when it comes to equal distribution of limited resources in these times of panic? They are not different from other people around the world who panic buy. Very great. I love this question. Let's use a past experience. When the Tohoku disaster happened in Japan with the nuclear plant disaster, one thing that I really remember vividly, like not vividly, but very, very well in my mind was, you know, there was no water, there was no food. And I remember that there was support coming in to provide people water and food. And I remember that there was a picture, and we all took this as an example of how, you know, how we should behave in such situations, is that people, there were thousands and thousands of people without resources, essential resources. And there were people lining up, literally lining up, not passing their turns, not pushing people away, not fighting, to wait for their turn to receive water. It's very interesting. I do think, and this probably has to do with the collective programming, this cultural aspect, you know, where the Japanese are so much more collectivistic and thinking of a we perspective than more from an I perspective. And that we perspective, as I mentioned before, the herd behavior can have a huge impact on our individual behaviors. And if that's part of the kind of cultural perspective and the cultural response to such situations, then it's absolutely, I do think that that played a huge role in that. Again, I haven't been following the panic buying situation in Japan. I do know that there's a lot of outlets, the 7-Elevens, Family Marts, and other stores out there that there's like in every corner you can buy food. So I'm not sure how that panic situation played out. I'm expecting that it didn't really play out that bad in Japan, but I'm not sure about that. But that would be my answer to that. I do believe the Japanese have a very different response to that, and we can learn from that as well, right? So very good. Thank you, Ashley, for that question. Let's see, what do we have here? So let's see over there. Bill Pike mentions here, how would we suggest convincing others not to panic buy? How would you begin the conversation? Great question. And again, I think being in this webinar today and understanding that there are so many factors at play, and understanding the behavioral perspective, the psychological drivers of panic buying, and why people go out and panic buy or hoard buy, will give you a much more better understanding of what's driving this behavior. But as long as you can, I think as long as you can get that message out, I think we all have the responsibility today to help people alleviate this uncertainty that they have. We have a lot of uncertainty right now at this moment, right? Do we have our jobs? Will we survive? You know, will we see how food? How will the situation further develop? We need to get the message out. So the more information we get out to help other people understand is a first step, and helping people to, you know, better understand what's driving the panic buying. But I think another issue is once we are in survival mode, and unfortunately in some countries, we can't get out of that survival mode because of various factors at play there. It's very hard to prevent that, right? So the rational state and the irrational state. But I think information is absolutely key. So thank you for that question. Let's see, Aishwarya, same question as previously, as Paul, so as the previous person, so absolutely. And I think I also addressed Paul's question on the cultural aspects as well. I'm going to take two more, and then I'm going to end up here. Let's see, how do you, 1 second. Okay, so let me just click this one here. Here we go. Xiaowen Feng, how would you explain the spur and gun purchases in the US from a psychological perspective? Well, oh my goodness, yeah, that was very scary news, I have to say. You know, actually knowing that people are going out and buying guns in terms of, well, again, remember it's survival mode that kicks in, and you want to go and protect yourself, right? You want to ensure your further survival. And I believe in some countries where they actually have very lucid gun laws, or it's okay to buy a gun, or it's believed that you're allowed to protect yourself through using weapons, you know, it doesn't surprise me that that kind of product is seen as an essential product. Even though it could be a non-essential product, people might go out and still go out and buy products such as weapons because they believe that that's a way for extending their survival. Again, psychologically, I'm giving that explanation. And also it helps them to protect themselves. So I think that's really the reason why that's happening. It's unfortunate, but it does. One more question I'll take here. I'll take one last one. Abdul Rahman Bala Muhammad. How can these lessons be documented to ensure that we are strategically placed and better informed to tackle this issue if it ever occurs again? Thank you. I think this is a great question to end with. And what I want to say here is, I think, and on more of a positive note, I think COVID-19, you know, has done something very extraordinary. Not only is it a threat, but it has allowed us to take a step back and reflect. It has allowed us to think about How are we going to work from now on? How are we going to respond from now on? COVID-19 has slowed things down, not only our brains, but how we consume. What are we consuming? We are going out more into nature. We are being more together than ever before, collectively. We're not, we're realizing that we're being driven by so many external factors. And now having the brakes put on, we have time to reflect about this. Is this really important? Is the job that I'm still doing today important? I haven't been connected. One thing that the internet has done, it has made us more separate and individualistic than ever before. But I think this situation now has made us be more connected than ever before. And I think that will become a reflective moment of how can we pass this on? How can we do it better? Look at the environment. We've seen examples in China, in Venice, where the environment has cleaned up because of the slowing down of this economy. And so being reflective of this, I think as an organization, as people, as governments, we should take notice of this. Hopefully this situation never happens again, but it's a phenomenal situation to look at COVID-19 from a positive perspective and to help us rethink, how do we want to continue? How do we want to live? And what can we change to make this world a better place? And so that's kind of where I want to end for today. I want to thank you for your time and for your participation. Give me a hands up and raise if you enjoyed today's webinar. Again, I'm not very used to giving webinars, but I really enjoyed this. Thank you again for participating, and I look forward to continuing this dialogue with you online. So please be sure, I know a lot of people love to take selfies and put stories. If you want to make a story out of today on Instagram, please do connect with me on social media. On Instagram or in LinkedIn for continuing this discussion, because the beautiful thing about today is it doesn't end here. We continue, and also back in our classrooms. Again, thank you everyone for participating and taking part in today's webinar.
Thank you, Ali. That was brilliant. And thank you everybody so much for joining. As we said before, a recording will be sent out in the following days with the recording of Ali's presentation. If you would like more information on our courses, please make sure to visit hult.edu. And if you feel it was useful, we actually have other webinars coming up in the Virtual Skills Lab series. And the next one will be next Friday with Professor Rob Anthony discussing leadership in crisis. And please see hult.edu/virtual skills, and you will see all of our webinars there. So that's all from us today. Thank you so much for your presentation, Ali. And
You're
thank
welcome.
you everyone for joining us. Hope to see you all soon.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
See you guys. Bye. Bye-bye.